Well, welcome everyone. I'm Terry, if you don't know who I am. I'm one of the pastors here this morning, and I just want to give my own welcome to everyone here today, and especially to the kids. It is so great to have them here in this service with us today. And parents, moms especially, because I'm a mom, I get it. You might be a little bit nervous having them here, a little bit of extra noise, a little bit of crinkle from the snacks we know you're eating. Totally good. Totally fine with that. I am a mom. I'm also a former grade 1 teacher, an early childhood person in my former life, but this is much more where I'm at. However, I absolutely love kids, and I love having them here, and I just want everyone to feel comfortable with a little bit of extra noise and a little bit of distraction today. Today, we are excited to have the kids here, and they're actually going to be helping me out a little bit with the message. Before they come, I just want to kind of open up where we're going and where we're headed today. We've been in the book of Luke, studying the series about Jesus and Jesus being our King, and today we're going to be in Luke chapter 10. But I want to start out with a question. I'm sure all of us have had this experience in one form or another, but have you ever gone on a trip that just did not turn out the way you had hoped it would? I'm sure you have. When our son, who is now a teenager, he was just over a year, my husband Harvey and I thought that we would go on this really romantic cruise, get away from baby life for a little bit, and have this great romantic little getaway. It was the first time on a cruise for both of us, but we like boats, we like the water. We figured this will be really a great way to get away. But it wasn't until we got onto the actual boat that Harv realized that he really did not like the idea of being out in the middle of nowhere with thousands of feet of water underneath him and nowhere to go. And if I fell off, what would eat me? And it unnerved him to the point where he just could not relax the entire 7-day cruise. Like, the entire 7-day cruise. Like, it was not the romantic, relaxing getaway that we thought that it would be. And needless to say, we have never and never will get on a cruise ship ever again. Oh well. Our passage today is about someone who also took a trip that did not turn out the way he was expecting, but this time it was for a very different reason. Today we're going to be in Luke 10, which comes on the heels of some pretty major events in Jesus' life and ministry. And his days are filled with, miraculous healings and provocative teaching and the feeding of a multitude with a kids' meal. His disciples are starting to kind of get the idea that, maybe Jesus might actually be the Messiah. He's facing significant opposition, both from those within his community and without. And at the end of Luke 9, Jesus actually speaks about the cost of following him. The way of Jesus really is not a very easy way. We aren't quite halfway through Luke yet, and Jesus is intently focused on his journey to the cross. And twice in Luke 9, actually, he predicts his death 2 times in that chapter. And in Luke 9 and 10, he actually sends out some followers on mission trips. And we can see how he's starting to prepare for when his time on earth is complete, and his bride, the church, us, will carry on his mission. We first get a glimpse of this mission. Ken talked about it a number of weeks ago at the beginning of Luke 4:18, when he announced to a bewildered crowd that he was appointed to bring good news to the poor and to set captives free, to open the eyes of the blind. And as we read a little bit further in Luke, it's almost like Jesus kind of summarizes this passage into one line. In Luke 19:10, he says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save those who were lost." The mission of Jesus, then, was to seek and to save those who were lost. He came intentionally to look for those who were floundering in their brokenness and sin and pain and oppression so that he could reveal God's love to them and to restore them to relationship with the Father through his death on the cross. And when Jesus left to go back to the Father, he commissioned us, his bride, his followers, to carry on that same mission. Now, the word mission is an interesting one, as we can often think of it as like a task that we perform or a job that we're assigned or something that we need to do, right? And while there's truth in this, in today's passage, the mission of Jesus, we learn, is not just something that we do, but it's actually a way of life that we are called to. And in fact, it's a way of life that actually becomes a form of worship to our Father. To help us understand this, Jesus used a very familiar story or a parable in Luke 10 to show us that worship and mission are intricately intertwined. Now, I've asked the kids to help me with this passage reading today, but before they do, I just want to set the stage just a little bit for them. There are two really important things that we need to know about the setting and the characters in our story. So first, our story takes place in an area of the ancient Near East that was called the Ascent of Adumim. I really hope I'm saying that right. It's a well-known section on a really treacherous 3,000-foot uphill journey from Jericho to the city of Jerusalem. Well, one of our characters in this story is actually making the trip in the opposite direction. So he's going from Jerusalem down to Jericho, which means he has to walk over 3,000 feet downhill over a span of 17 miles. Now, just for some context, that would be like us walking from here, the church, to Edmonton Expo Center, Northlands Coliseum, where the Oilers used to play. This was before Cabela's and Mountain Equipment Co-op, so we have no gear at all, okay? Our friend is wearing sandals and a robe, much like Pastor Amber. So if you can imagine what Pastor Amber is wearing today, she'd be wearing that, and maybe a little water bottle. Okay, so she's going downhill 3,000 feet. There was a risk of falling, steep terrain, getting cut up by rocks, burned by blazing sun. I mean, there is no SPF 60 in these days. The Adumim was aptly named in local terms as the Ascent of Blood. Like, you're not going to find that on Expedia, right? Let's go to the Ascent of Blood for our holiday. It was impossible to complete the entire journey in one day, and travelers often engaged in the hospitality of local inns set up along the way. And so Jesus himself would have actually made this trip several times in his lifetime. So everyone would have known about the hazards of this road. This would have been like the equivalent of driving to Fort Mac in the middle of winter, right? Everybody knows the road. Everybody knows it's a scary one. Well, the second thing we need to know about our unnamed traveler in this story is that he is a Jew. Now, during this time, the Jews were under the Roman occupation, which was a pretty horrible regime. It was very violent. It was very oppressive. But there was another group in our story that also antagonized the Jews, and this was a group known as the Samaritans. Now, the Samaritans and the Jews, they hated each other. In fact, hate is actually not even a strong enough word, I don't think. And as with many long-standing feuds, the origin story is a little bit convoluted, but it's possible that the Samaritans in Jesus' day descended from Jews who were living in Samaria hundreds of years before. And these Jews in Samaria intermarried with other cultures, and so they tried to maintain Jewish standards of worship, but as things often go, it gets a little bit mixed in there. So the Jews, the true Israelite Jews, considered the Samaritans the black sheep of the family. In fact, they actually called them half-breeds. Both groups argued over correct worship practices, the right way to follow God, and the Samaritans didn't really help matters because they took their name from a phrase in Hebrew that sounds kind of like keeper of the law. So it's kind of like, well, no, we're the keeper of the law. No, we're the keeper of the law, right? We do it right. No, we do it right. And so they're fighting, and it actually became very, very violent. Jesus at one point ran into opposition with the Samaritans, and the disciples wanted to call down fire from heaven and burn them all up. Like, that's how much they hated each other. Now, if you are a fan of VeggieTales, any VeggieTale fans in here? Yes, all right. You may remember Flibberaloo and Gibberty-Lot. The residents of those two towns hated each other so much that they threw pots and socks at each other. However, the animosity between the Jews and the Samaritans went well beyond playful jest, and it was rife with scathing bitterness. And both groups desperately sought God's attention through strict rules and traditions of worship and violently disagreed on which way was the right way. In our story, Jesus is about to prove to both groups that they are wrong and completely upend what it means to live a life that is pleasing to God, one where worship and mission come together to usher in the kingdom of God among the broken and the hurting. All right, take it away.
Where do I go now?
On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replied to him with a question. "What is written in the law?" "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus looked at the expert of the law and said he had answered correctly, and then added, "Do this and you will live." The expert of the law wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus looked at the expert of the law and answered his question with a parable, which is a simple story used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of the robbers. "Give us all your money!" The robbers stole everything he had, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a pastor was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. "Are you all right?" He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. "There, that should do it." Then he put him on his own animal. "Come on, it's getting to an inn so you can cover." The Samaritan took him to an inn to take care of him. The next day, the Samaritan took 2 coins and gave them to the innkeeper. And with that parable, Jesus showed them all what it really means to love their neighbor, not just the people they like, but everyone, even those who seem different. And Jesus asked the question, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?"
Thanks, kids. Didn't they do a great job? So who is my neighbor? Let's take some time now to unpack this story. In Luke 10:25, we have this expert of the law, a lawyer. He's trying to test Jesus, and he asks, "What should I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus answers him with the question, "Well, what does the law say? What did Moses tell you?" So in Luke 10:27, the man answers in what is known as the greatest commandment. "You will love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus replies, "Good, do this, and you will live." But the lawyer, he wanted to justify his actions. He wanted to know where the bar of love was set so that he could get away with just the minimum requirements of the law. Or as one commentator said, he was kind of trying to limit the law's command by limiting its parameters. So he asked, "Who is my neighbor?" In other words, do I really have to love everybody? The greatest commandment actually comes from 2 verses in the Old Testament. It's 2 verses that are kind of pushed together. So we've got Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:18. And it's really interesting when you look at this verse in Leviticus, which reads, "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself." Did you catch that? Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself. Well, as we learned, the Jews did not consider Samaritans true Israelites. They called them half-breeds. So you can kind of see where this lawyer is headed with this question. Do I really have to love the Samaritans? Can I get away with just loving my own kind, doing the minimum, and still get to heaven, still have eternal life? So then Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan to show that the way to life with God is not a matter of doing. It's not dependent on us keeping a minimum requirement of the law. Instead, it's a way of being. It's a way of living in such a way that we are propelled by the overflow of God's love in our own hearts to seek out and to care for the lost, the poor, the oppressed, and even our enemy. I really love how Jesus uses a Samaritan to make his point. This is a fictional story. It's a made-up story, and he could have used anybody. He could have used a Roman soldier. He could have used some other, culture of the day. The Babylonians and Assyrians in Jewish history were pretty mean people as well. But he chose intentionally to use a Samaritan. Now, my version calls him a despised Samaritan, but other versions refer to him as a certain Samaritan. So it kind of makes me wonder if there was this particular Samaritan in their village or in their community that everybody would have intuitively understood who Jesus was talking about. Maybe in the same way that we kind of refer to, that politician or that homeless lady in our neighborhood. Everybody knew. And while Jesus encountered his own frustrations with the Samaritans during his time on earth, as we read in John's Gospel, we see that it was actually Jesus who sought to break barriers with this unlovable group. It was part of his mission. And using a Samaritan for his story just makes sense. Jesus sought out to save the lost, including Samaritans. And in John 4, we see Jesus reaching out to a Samaritan lady, a woman who was despised in her own community. She was despised for her lifestyle and the way that she held herself. And in fact, it was to this unlikely woman that Jesus first revealed that he was the Messiah. And because of this encounter with this very unlikable, unlovable, unlikely Samaritan, many Samaritans believed in Jesus and invited him to stay in their village for a couple days, which he did. So he has this encounter with this Samaritan woman, and many of them believe. So let's go back to when Jesus first introduces his mission. This is in Luke 4:18 that I referred to earlier. I think we have it up on the screen. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come. Now, this passage is a passage that Jesus quoted out of Isaiah, from the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 61:1. And we're going to look at that up on the screen in just a minute. Actually, you can put that up now, and we can kind of compare the two. In Isaiah 61:1, the prophet Isaiah says, "For the Spirit of the Lord, sovereign Lord is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to comfort the brokenhearted, to proclaim that captives will be released, and that prisoners will be freed." So very similar language. I mean, obviously Jesus is quoting from Isaiah. And when we look at this passage in Isaiah, this was written hundreds of years before Jesus came on earth. And so Isaiah in this passage is actually talking about the coming Messiah. He's explaining this is what the Son of God is going to do. This is what the Messiah is going to do. He is going to come and bring good news to the poor, comfort the brokenhearted. So Jesus, in effect, is saying, when he quotes this, that I'm anointed. This is me. I'm coming to do this. What I find really, really interesting is that if we move a couple chapters earlier in Isaiah, to Isaiah 58, we see very similar language again. But the context is so different, totally different. Let me read to you Isaiah 58. In my Bible, the heading is entitled True and False Worship. And the section I'm going to read to you is actually God narrating. So think of this as God speaking about his children, the Israelites. "Tell my people Israel of their sins. Yet they act so pious. They come to the temple every day and seem delighted to learn all about me. They act like a righteous nation that would never abandon the laws of its God. And they ask me to take action on their behalf, pretending they want to be near me. We have fasted before you, they say. Why aren't you impressed? We've been very hard on ourselves, and you don't even notice. I will tell you why, I respond. It's because you are fasting to please yourselves. Even while you fast, you keep oppressing your workers. What good is fasting when you keep on fighting and quarreling? This kind of fasting will never get you anywhere with me. You humble yourselves by going through motions of penance, bowing your heads like reeds bending in a wind. You dress in burlap and cover yourselves with ashes. Is this what you call fasting? Do you really think this will please the Lord? No. This is the kind of fasting I want. Free those who are wrongly imprisoned, lighten the burden of those who work for you, let the oppressed go free, and remove the chains that bind people. Share your food with the hungry and give shelter to the homeless. Give clothes to those who need them and do not hide from relatives who need your help. Remove the heavy yoke of oppression and stop pointing your finger and spreading vicious rumors. Feed the hungry and help those in trouble, and then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be as noon. Those are strong words. You know, it's so easy to go through life thinking we are doing the right things, isn't it? I find this very convicting in my own heart, in my own life. This whole week, as I've been preparing for this, God's been showing me some things in my own life. I read my Bible, I pray, come to church, volunteer, pay my tithe, I'm nice to people around me, I do all the right churchy things. That should be enough, shouldn't it? God says no. As we see from these verses, our worship is nothing if it is not accompanied by mission. The two must go together. Let me explain. True worship, true authentic worship takes our eyes off of ourselves. It draws us close to the heart of the Father, and we are reminded once again that He is God and we are not. When we engage in authentic worship, whether through Bible reading, music, prayer, fasting, we remember that we too were once broken, oppressed, lost, and poor, and it is only because He sought us out, and saved us that we are able to even worship at all. True worship draws us close to the heart of the Father, and if we are close to the heart of the Father, then His heart for the lost and the broken will become our heart as well, and we won't be able to sit still. We will be compelled to seek out and to save the lost, not because we have to, but because we want to. If our worship is just singing songs on Sunday morning and we don't connect personally with God's heart as we do so, it's just noise. Noise that irritates and moves us away from God. If we read our Bibles so we can tick off boxes on a Bible reading plan and it makes no impact on our lives, then it's just a meaningless task. If our prayer time is just to talk about our own needs and we don't take time to listen to the Father, then we're boring Him with our Santa Claus list. Krish Kandiah wrote a book called God is Stranger, and in it he explains worship in this way. If our worship has no connection with God's heart for justice in this world, then it has no connection with Him. If we do not listen to the cries of the poor, God will not listen to our cries in prayer. Let me read that again. If our worship has no connection with God's heart for justice in this world, then it has no connection with Him. If we do not listen to the cries of the poor, God will not listen to our cries in prayer. The Samaritan in our story, he got it. He got the mission of Jesus. And unlike the lawyer, the Samaritan understood that loving the Lord his God with all of his heart, soul, mind, and strength was just not a means to an end. It's not just a way to life, reduced simply to obeying a list of do's and don'ts and rituals and traditions. But he recognized that loving the Lord is a way of life, expressed in true, authentic compassion towards anyone who crossed his path, no matter how different or if they were his sworn enemy. The Samaritan didn't need to ask, "Who is my neighbor?" He already knew. He understood that to live a life that pleases God means loving those we would not naturally gravitate towards, That as we speak good news to the poor, comfort the brokenhearted, clothe those who are naked, and tend to the wounds of the hurting, that we are touching the very heart of God, and it rises up to him as a beautiful act of worship. Jesus is calling us to carry on this mission. And our unlikely hero understood this. And I think there's probably a lot we could learn from him today. Just 3 things that the Samaritan can teach us about living on mission. First, he teaches us that Jesus shows up in unexpected places and in unexpected people. When Jesus shows up, the kingdom shows up. And in this story, Jesus shows up in the enemy. He shows up in the foreigner. He shows up in the Samaritan. How can Jesus show up in that way? But he did. And Jesus often shows up in that way. As Bono, the lead singer of U2, has been quoted as saying, if God is in the slums, God is in the slums in the cardboard boxes where the poor play house. God is in the silence of a mother who has infected her child with a virus that will end both their lives. God is in the cries heard under the rubble of war. God is in the debris of wasted opportunity and lives. And God is with us if we are with them. Quoting Kandaya again, as we open our hearts and homes up to strangers, we open up our hearts and homes to God. And as strangers find God, we find God. I'm going to say that one more time. As we open up our hearts and homes to strangers, we open our hearts and homes to God. And as strangers find God, we find God. Do the people you hang out with look like you? When was the last time you went a different direction? Drove down a different road? Intentionally talked to somebody who was different than you and listened to their story? Where have you seen God lately? The Good Samaritan story teaches us to be prepared for mission. Our hero lived intentionally and ready to share compassion the moment opportunity arose. He readily pulled out wine to disinfect and oil to soothe the wounds. He had bandages to wrap them in and knew what to do. Living life on mission with Jesus means living with our eyes open to the pain around us and a readiness and a knowledge to step in and to love those who are hurting. Maybe it means having granola bars and water bottles in our car, or maybe a gift card to hand out for a meal. Finally, the Good Samaritan teaches us that being on mission with Jesus requires sacrifice. In Luke 9, he talks about the cost of following Jesus. There is a cost to being on mission with him. The Good Samaritan's compassion for the wounded man cost him an awful lot, actually. It cost him his supplies that he may have packed for his own journey, for his own wounds, in case he fell. He used his own donkey. He traveled to the nearest inn, which could have taken some time and risk. We have no idea how far he had to go. He spent time caring for the man once they got there, and then he paid the sum of 2 days' wages to the innkeeper and then offered to pay more. He was really generous. But this was the norm. He did all of this without batting an eye. It was just the way he lived life. He was ready to give whatever the cost. Are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of others? What does true, authentic generosity look like? You know, it's important to give to the church and to organizations that help the poor. And often, those organizations, they have the infrastructure, they have the way to do that. And they need financial resources in order to do that. So please don't hear me saying, don't give, okay? Don't hear me saying, don't give your tithe or give to the poor. But at the same time, our giving can sometimes be a way to avoid what God might be asking us to do. As the late Keith Green used to say, it's easy to write a check, but God can't cash checks in heaven. He needs you to go. When we step out in faith and choose to live a life on mission with Jesus, our lives will never be the same. You know, we have actually some grade 9s who in this past week from our church and the Christian school went on a week-long mission trip. And I can guarantee their lives are not the same. They spent a week in the inner city, in the lower mainland, in food banks and in shelters and prayer drives on horrible drug-filled streets. They stayed in the bus. They didn't come out. But they got to see, they were exposed. And every single one of them, their lives are changed. When we go on mission, our lives are changed. For the past 2 years, I've had the incredible privilege of leading volunteer teams to serve in our local prisons. Now, going to prison is a very humbling experience because you quickly realize that we are all just one mistake away from being in the same situation. So a couple of weeks ago, I was subbing in for one of our ladies' teams, and I was leading a devotional on the story I just made reference to, the story of the Samaritan woman at the well. And it was a smaller group of inmates. I think we only had about 5 ladies there. And the lady beside me was an older lady, quite a bit older than the rest of the inmates. And she was quite anxious. She had her bail hearing the next day, and she was just like, what does my future hold? And she sat there like this, the whole chapel, just shaking. She was so anxious, so nervous. And we went through the passage, we talked about it. Now, the story of the Samaritan woman at the well, women, especially women in prison, they intuitively get it. They get this woman. This woman had 3 strikes against her in her Jewish culture. She was the town floozy who had 5 husbands. She was a Samaritan, and she was a woman. And in that day, women were lower than dogs. So this woman, she was an outcast. And the women inmates with me, they get it. They got it. They're like, yeah, I know this woman. I am that woman, right? And as we were wrapping up the devotional time, I asked the ladies, who was it that Jesus first revealed that he was the Messiah? And they're shouting out answers. They're like, oh, the disciples, religious leaders, the whatever. I'm like, no, ladies, look at your Bibles. Look at the passage. Who did Jesus reveal that he was the Messiah to? And they looked down, and this older lady beside me is just shaking. Her jaw dropped, and her eyes bulged open. No way. No way. He trusted a lady like me? He told her that he was a Messiah? No way. And it just hit her, and the tears just flowed from her eyes. And she wept for the rest of the chapel service. She just was so overwhelmed by the love of Jesus for a woman like her. And it does not take much to overwhelm people with the love of God. The Samaritan overwhelmed the traveler, Jesus' audience, with his kindness and compassion for an enemy. Every week, the volunteers I lead get the opportunity to overwhelm inmates with the love of Jesus for the vulnerable and the forgotten. Our grade 9s got to go and overwhelm people on the street with food and shelter. It doesn't take much, but it can make a world of difference in their lives and in ours. So as I wrap up today, how is your worship? Are you connecting with the heart of God as you worship him? Or is it just noise? Are you going through the motions of church and tradition? In a moment, Amber is going to close us with a song, and I love this one line in the lyrics. If I'm known by how I love, let my life reflect how much I love you. If I'm known by how I love, let my life reflect how much I love you. Is your love for God, your worship of him, reflected in your actions? And then finally, are you living a life on mission? Am I living a life on mission? Are we as a church living a life on mission? Are we prepared, intentional, ready for the cost? Mission looks different for everybody, as we're all at different ages and stages of life, but we are all called to seek out and to save the lost.